This is episode 97 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing. I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. This and every week we'll be talking to you about public policy issues facing New Mexico. And this week I am pleased to be joined by Carla Kugler. She is the president and CEO of the Associated Builders and Contractors of New Mexico. Welcome to the show, Carla.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I should say that you are a relatively newly minted head of that organization. Your previous boss, Roxanne Rivera-Wiest, retired, left the organization, and you've been at it for how many months now?
5
months. All right. Well, you got a baptism of fire during the 2019 legislative session.
I did.
And we will be able to talk a little bit about that, plenty about that, and, kind of issues in construction in New Mexico. But before we get to ABC, what Associated Builders and Contractors is, who is Carla Kugler? Are you from New Mexico originally? How did you come to be in a construction trade association?
Well, I am not born in New Mexico, but I have been here most definitely long enough to be native. Went to school through here. I am a Lobo. I came into construction quite haphazardly. I was getting my undergrad and working for attorneys, and I just wasn't liking it. And I took my dog to 7D Mechanical during the daytimes, because the 7D stood for 7 dogs. I took my dog for doggy daycare. And so he could hang out. Of course, this is before you have kids, so you cater to your dog a lot better. And I was complaining that I was not enjoying what I did. And it was the next week that office manager called me and asked me to come and work for them. And I did, and I never went back. I loved it so much. For one, I could go and work with my dog, but I met the most amazing people. I loved the day-to-day operations of construction. And that's how I came to be with Associated Builders and Contractors, is we had apprentices in the program, and I was served on the board and got familiarized with everything that ABC did, and I was all in. And when the recession hit, I was the highest paid person in our office that wasn't family. And so I started looking for, I went into ABC and I said, I would really, like to stay with ABC. I love it. I love what it stands for. So let me know if you guys hear of anything. And the next week, Roxanne called me and said, we are looking for a succession plan for our education director. And she loves you, and would you like to come on board? And I thought that's a perfect fit. So 8 years later, new succession plan with Roxanne, and she, asked if I would be interested, or the board did, and I interviewed, and I was lucky enough they kept me.
Very nice, very nice. How interesting! It's a great story that your dog helped you get your dream job and move away from all those attorneys and hanging out in offices all day with them. So were you, now maybe it's me, but I was a political science major, and I actually am one of those people stuck with it, obviously, running the Rio Grande Foundation. Now, I would consider, looking at it from the outside, the head of the Associated Builders and Contractors is a fairly political job. You're dealing with a lot of policy issues. Was that kind of your area of interest? Were you more on the business side? Because I could easily see somebody, I don't know, but it doesn't sound like you come from a direct construction background.
Not at all. Not at all. I am actually also a poli-sci major and communication. So political science and communication. And working for attorneys, working for some political campaigns at that point as well. Thought that maybe law school would be the next logical step until you kind of get in the weeds and realize that maybe that's not the thing to do. And that's what attracted me to ABC. Is ABC was or is everything that I really enjoy. It's the philosophical reasons behind the organization, but it is politics, but it's not too much politics. It's event planning. It is not too much events. It's education, but I'm not a teacher. So it's all of those aspects that I really, really like about everything, any kind of job. And I just get to do a little bit of it.
It is many ways similar to the Rio Grande Foundation, which you do a little cross-training of all different types. Now, you mentioned that you've spent time on construction sites. So you came to that as a result of being in your job. What do you enjoy, or what do you find challenging about that industry, and whether it's just construction as a enterprise, or maybe construction in New Mexico and how it works here? Because for a number of years, not so much the last couple, but New Mexico's construction environment was very depressed. It was not doing particularly well. But talk about just that whole enterprise of that business.
So I can't speak for anything other than New Mexico, what we've experienced here. What I can say is I still feel that we are depressed when it comes to the other construction, around the nation and comparative of everywhere else in the U.S. I have found that one of the things that I really like about construction, for one, obviously the people, but the daily operations and how that changes. What I've seen from our contractor side is the regulations of licensure, the regulations of permitting, the environment regulations. So I know that I don't have a lot of comparison with the rest of the United States other than other chapters, but it certainly seems that New Mexico has a heavier burden as far as our contractors and fulfilling a lot of those aspects.
Yeah, and I want to talk about your index. In some general terms, your organization nationally puts out a merit shop index, but just the term merit shop kind of speaks to something about what Associated Builders and Contractors is all about. It's not just every construction enterprise that wants to get involved in your group that does. You actually have kind of a organizing principle, or several organizing principles around ABC, Associated Builders and Contractors. So talk about kind of the philosophical underpinnings of your organization. It's really great that a business organization does have, and speaking editorially, some organizing principles, because I find that too many organizations, i.e. chambers of commerce or whatever, just take all comers and then they have no legs to stand on, because they're not able to respond to the public policy environment and the political environment, because just anybody that can join does, and they get hamstrung. But your organization takes a principled oriented approach, and talk about that.
We do. So, ABC nationally is what we consider the voice of merit contractors. We're for open competition, a free market. So we are not against unionization or union labor, but that does, with our philosophy, it does put us at odds with a lot of the union opinions of how things are. Especially here in New Mexico, non-union contractors make up over 92% of the entire construction community. Yet we still are. We still see PLAs. We still have.
Hold on, sorry. I'm only going to interrupt when you talk jargon.
Stop. Okay.
PLAs, project labor agreements. I know we're going to go through maybe all of the little variables here in your Merit Shop scorecard. And by the way, folks can look at the Merit Shop scorecard at meritshopscorecard.org. But what is a PLA, or project labor agreement?
A project labor agreement is an agreement that a contractor must sign a union contract in order to get that work.
Right. And that is done, obviously, on a state or government oriented project, primarily state. I don't know that you'd have explicitly local PLAs, especially in New Mexico, because most of the projects have some money behind them. And by the way, since we're here, New Mexico scores a C on your index PLA mandates. So we're not as bad as on many of the issues that New Mexico involves itself in on construction. So we're not an F, but we're not an A. So I think it's safe to say we're on that one.
Yeah, it's safe to say we're A.
Okay. Are there any PLAs, so we can give people an idea of what a PLA might be in the real world? What would a PLA in New Mexico look like? Or have there been any PLAs, project labor agreements, that you've seen in New Mexico?
One of the larger ones, and of course this was a while back, but it's a good example, is the University of New Mexico Hospital. When they put in the big wing of the University of New Mexico Hospital, the Richardson
cancer wing? The cancer wing,
yes,
right.
the cancer wing, that was done under a project labor agreement. So you had to be a union organization in order to obtain that work. Got it.
There you go. Now you know what PLAs are, and I know that they are bigger. It is important for folks to know that this, New Jersey or New York, some of these really union dominant states, they obviously have somewhat more political sway, the unions do, but they certainly have more membership as well as a percentage of the workforce. So it can be challenging if you do, I would imagine, impose these policies. It can be a little challenging to find the number of workers in New Mexico that would be able to work on these projects.
That would qualify for that. Yes, it is challenging and it is limiting. And why the state would want to limit themselves to a very, very small portion of the construction community that would be able to do that is a question only they can answer.
There you go. Well, so we don't need to dwell on all of these, but prevailing wage, that's a big one. Talk about what the prevailing wage means. And of course, New Mexico has one, without getting into nitty gritty, because I know it can be a very complicated issue.
It is a complicated issue. And really, the prevailing wage is the wage that is set by basically by the union. It's a collective bargaining agreement, which means that a union goes up and bargains for the wages that are going to be set. And so no matter what organization, if you're union, non-union, you must pay that prevailing wage. I joke that the prevailing wage, the only reason why it's called that is because it prevailed as far as the legislation that that set it. There's really no, some could argue that it is inflated, and that's just the way that got.
Well, it certainly is inflated because the unions didn't spend all that time in political capital building and donating to those politicians in order to get wages that are the same as they could have gotten were they not in the union to begin with. But and that wage has been renegotiated or legislated upward, going back now a decade under the Richardson administration. They raised the prevailing wage. Now, this is for projects that receive state dollars. There's a federal prevailing wage law that if you get federal dollars, you get that imposed on you for state projects in New Mexico because we have a prevailing wage. So the issue, and I'll toss it back to you again on this, when it comes to the APS school bond election. Now, I know your organization got behind that, and I know you have reasons for that, but with APS, if they were to do their school construction, or at least work to achieve a non-prevailing, a market wage, what would that mean in broad terms?
It means they would be able to build more with less. They would be able to either their budget would be lower for the same project, or they would be able to build more things for the same amount of money, really. If they can use a market wage, they would get more bang for their buck.
And that would be an excellent reason why the voters did turn down that tax increase, and might want to consider when they have a renewal of a bond on the fall election ballot, that folks might want to send them another message and say, hey, if APS wants more of my money, they need to be a vocal advocate for repealing the prevailing wage. And I can assure you, I think you were in the committee. There was a prevailing wage repeal bill, and I believe you and I were two of the folks that talked about that. And of course, it didn't make it out of the first House committee this session. But oh well. So, on a similar note, in fact, the same hearing was right to work. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of right to work, because we all know that simply means that you don't have to join a union as a precondition of having a job in a given workforce, and that we kind of beat right to work to a pulp. But public-private partnerships, now you get a lot of conservatives that suddenly freak out when you talk about public-private partnerships. But I think the way you look at them and where we talk about public-private partnerships, they do have a lot of potential and utility. How does ABC view public-private partnerships? What is the role that they serve?
I think that public-private partnerships could make a great tool for economic development. When organizations can come together to build the best project and to be able to figure out how to work that financially, it benefits everybody. So we consider it a tool.
And I know that the now deceased Representative Larrañaga was the individual, at least in the legislature, that had pushed very hard for public-private partnerships. And there was legislation that was seriously discussed. It was much watered down this session. What's the status, though, in terms of New Mexico and public-private partnerships? And by the way, we get an F on your index. Maybe that's last year.
We should. And that may be for construction specifically. So I know that Patty Lundstrom had introduced public-private partnership bill. There was a couple of them introduced. Hers that got brought up was for broadband and something else. It didn't have anything to do with construction.
Okay. But I mean, even today's roads are a form of a public-private partnership. The building of those roads is not done by government employees. The people out with the orange cones and whatnot, those are private businesses. They're using tax dollars to maintain our roads, but there are more innovative approaches that have been used in states that have public-private partnerships in place that allow innovative techniques that really basically allow more of our money to go further. And
there is roads. Many states have used them even for like airports.
Exactly.
To help build that kind of infrastructure up where the state, city, county may not have the funds readily available, but they be able to use finances and be able to pay that back. So many other states are using it quite successfully. We just have not been able to convince our legislators to take that step.
Yes.
And
we have that as a priority that we've worked on. We certainly hoped that we could get, in the days of Martinez and maybe a Republican House, some more moderate Dems on board with that issue, but they remain opposed to it. And the specific project I hear about is Paseo del Volcan, kind of that idea of running kind of an outer loop from I-40 around through Rio Rancho and then up to I-25. There's been talk of a form of public-private partnership for that to avoid some of the funding issues that the state has always brought up when unable to provide that. So these are four, I would call them hardcore public policy issues. But your study talks about workforce development and career and technical education. On the first, there's an F for workforce development, and then career and technical education, we get a D. Now, what is your organization's mission or desire when it comes to those kinds of issues? Is it more internships or apprenticeships? Is it higher quality programs in high schools or technical education? Talk a little bit about that.
So apprenticeship is one of our main focuses. It's something that we do very well and we're very proud of. We have an apprenticeship program. We offer 7 different trades currently: carpentry, sheet metal, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, laborers, and masonry. We are the largest multi-trade apprenticeship program in the state, and we're very proud about that. We've tried to do some pre-apprenticeship programs through high schools. We've done, of course, we believe in building the full person, right? We build people. So we take them from high school, either whether it's dual credit or trying to come in with a pre-apprenticeship program, all the way through their continuing education, because journeymen have to now have 16 hours of continuing education to renew their licensure, to project supervision, to estimators. We take them through their entire education journey as far as construction. And that is one of the larger projects that we take on.
So let's walk through this. So you're talking about mostly high school graduates, and they say, Carla, hey, or who do they contact? Like, just in case somebody's listening.
Well, they can contact me. It's fine. It's a small office of 4. I do have a vice president of apprenticeship. Her name is Greta Schumann. She has been there forever, and she is our principal, vice principal, counselor.
So this will be the time we give out the number. What's the number over there if they want to get in touch with Greta?
It is 505-830-4222, and she is extension 103.
Excellent. So this is that time. People are graduating from school and they're evaluating their career options. I assume that's the main group you're looking at, is high school grads, or maybe somebody who's disenchanted with college and they want to go into more of this kind of line of work and doing construction.
Working with their hands, right?
Exactly.
Anybody that likes working with their hands and wants to be employable, we will take you and we will train you. Surprisingly, our apprenticeship program, I think the average age is about 33.
Oh.
We see a lot of I say second careers, but somebody that may have gone and worked at fast food or a call center or done something for a few years and then realized that might not be the path of greater good for them. Sure. And that construction really can pay well as a career choice. So of course we are state regulated, and for the state of New Mexico, you have to be 18 in order to be an apprentice by regulation. So we do ask, we hit the high schools hard as far as a option. ABC actually has their post-secondary certification through higher education. So we are a school, a college by higher ed standards of state of New Mexico. So we are a college. We're just a trade college. We're just a different one. Our curriculum is post-secondary, and we are proud of the fact that we're the only trade college in New Mexico.
Well, that's very neat. And what could I expect? Somebody who shows up and says, "Hey, I'm interested in this." Do you have kind of for people who graduated high school not too long ago, the ASVAB, the military gives that test of rising seniors in high school, and it actually helps you come to a determination of what your career should be? Or do you just ask the young person in front of you, do you want to be an electrician? Do you want to be a mason? Do you have mechanisms for helping them choose?
We do. So we have descriptions on all of the trades that we offer. They have an interview process. So there is 2 ways of going about becoming an apprentice. You can work for a member company. You can, and already be in the construction industry. And in that case, they put the employer puts you in the classes. So they're paying you during the day. You're accruing OJTs, which are on the job training hours. And then you come to classes 2 nights a week. Okay, and the employer pays for it, right? But an apprentice does not pay for their related instruction. So at no cost to the student. You can also come off the street and come in and apply for the program. And if you interview well and you understand what you're getting into, it is our job to actively place you with a ABC member company and get you employed and working. And then again, a student is not, does not pay for their education. So the employer is willing to fork out the money to get these people trained and educated. They just want somebody that's employable to do it.
We'll get to that in a minute. But your study says that we're an F and a D respectively. F for workforce development, and career and technical education is a D. Now, I'll read a partial list of the states that receive A's for both. Arkansas, it's kind of a diverse group. Florida, so those are a couple of more conservative right to work type states. Iowa gets A's for both. Michigan, recently right to work, and then Rhode Island. So Rhode Island's a pretty, it's obviously a small state. It's not right to work. It's more traditionally Democrat. So there's kind of a diverse group of states in terms of these kind of workforce oriented. What do you know what the states that are innovating, what states that are at the top are doing, or what would you like New Mexico to do to help get the workforce more in line with your industry?
Well, I think that could probably be an entirely separate podcast. But one thing that other states that are doing very well are pushing for trades or pushing for career and technical education at a much earlier age. Something that starts in middle school, really, or even the latter part of elementary school. That it is okay for people to want to work with their hands. I think other states have adapted to that rather, much more quickly than we have. That whole idea of everybody needs to go to college is just not a concept that is working.
Let me just jump in there and say that, it's really odd that you have that situation here in New Mexico, because we all know that our state has relatively low levels of educational attainment. That's not to say that it's just people who don't like a traditional high school or whatever setting academically that they would do construction in the trades, but it certainly is an opportunity for them that it presents itself. And you would think that the school systems here would be more receptive to efforts to do that. So is that where you're finding a resistance, or where is it kind of not working?
I think we found it in several aspects. So 8 years ago, when I first came on to Associated Builders and Contractors, I would go to any career fair, any high school that would take me. And what we had found is that we were actually being approached a lot by special ed, right? They would want to come in to the Plan B kids, right? And it takes a lot of convincing to administration, to teachers, that I'll still and I'll still present construction as a career, but really that's not our target audience. We need to refocus that's not, construction is not a plan B. We'll take the best and the brightest of those groups as well, because we need those for advancements in technology, for things, and convincing teachers and also convincing parents that that's an okay field for your student to go into, or your child to go into. I think systemically in New Mexico, and I don't think we're alone, but I think our work ethic is really poor. I think there has been generations of working part-time or working as little as possible to get the bare minimum, or if you work too much, you'll get off of subsidies and subsistence and all of those other things that they have. So I think we're fighting that. I think we're fighting drugs.
Talk about that, because you hear often, and I know you're not in it, but the oil companies frequently will say, you can go down to the Permian Basin and earn, $20, $30, $40, $50 an hour if you can pass a drug test. Do you have some of the same issues?
We have exactly the same issues that we have employers right now that says, if you will show up and pass a drug test, we'll keep you. You can easily make $60,000 a year. But telling somebody that, or telling a high school kid or even a out of high school kid that they gotta, piss clean for a little while to keep a job. That's really, apparently it's a really big thing to do. So it's a hard concept for
family
them.
podcast, Carla. We're going to have to bleep that. I'm kidding. I'm just joking.
I probably will. But
Carla is, if you haven't met her before, she is very elegantly well-dressed, a very attractive woman. And for her just to say piss on a podcast brought a little tear to my eye. So it was very nice. So let's, we're kind of in that same field, but I think this is a useful transition because a few years ago, New Mexico was a state that was at the bottom of not only the jobs numbers, but your list in terms of job growth rate. And it sounds to me, well, first and foremost, again, your Merit Shop scorecard has us as an A now. So talk about some of the possibilities out there in that industry and how kind of things, yes, we're not Colorado, we're not Arizona, but we're doing a heck of a lot better than we have been in the area of construction. And there's a lot of opportunities in your industry right now. There
is a lot of opportunities in our industry. I'm going to go back again. When I started with ABC 8 years ago, we have an out of work list, right? As our apprentices get laid off or something happens, they would come in, that put essentially, it's our bench that they are sit and wait, and we try and actively get them employed. And we had people on every trade on the bench waiting to get picked up due to layoffs, no fault of their own, just lack of work. I can confidently say that for the last at least year and a half, if not 2 years, we do not have a single person on the out of work list. We have our interview committee, which consists of the companies that obviously have apprentices, that it's the owners of the companies that want to come in, and they conduct the interviews to make sure that somebody, one, is understanding the responsibilities that they're asking for, and two, that they're employable. It's almost like a pre-interview for a regular job interview. These guys are coming in just to see what we're bringing in off the street, because those guys, the interviewees, are leaving with business cards in hand. So it's a great time to go into construction. So I had one of our members tell me the other day that if he found a guy that could spell plumbing, he'll take him. Right. So that's where we are at this point.
Very, very nice. That's a very, very good turn of phrase to describe what is a hot job market out there. So folks, especially if you know a young person, I mean, it is right in the thick of it with regard to high school graduations, and they're a little on the fence about what their career futures might be. Hey, you might get involved in construction. At least you're not taking on all of that debt as a flying leap down that path. Do the construction thing for a few years, and if you like it, great. If you don't, then you can always come back to another area and get educated in that field if you know that you want to do it. But it pains me when people young people who don't know what they want to do, think they'll figure it out in 4 years of college, take on a bunch of debt, and then it doesn't work out and they wind up owing tens of thousands of dollars and wasting 4, 5, 6 years of their life in school doing something that they don't even know what they're going to do after the end of it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for all that. Now we have, I guess we got to talk a little bit about the session. And, I know there's a lot of issues. Construction really hits everything. We talked about a few of the specifics, but what happened this session that affected your industry outside of some of these, right to work, prevailing wage issues? How do you see the political climate affecting your industry in this, kind of new progressive world order, so to speak, as it faces New Mexico?
One of the largest challenges that we saw was, fortunately, the bill did not pass, but we did get a bill that has come up a couple of years now. Secretary of Workforce Solutions, Bill McCamley, who for years was Representative McCamley, had introduced a bill penalizing wage theft, which at the surface, if you think you're going to get penalties for wage theft,
nobody should have their wages stolen
nobody
from
should
them,
have
right?
their wages stolen from them, and it makes a lot of sense that that's what you should penalize them. Unfortunately, this bill, it tripled the penalties of a contractor found not paying the correct prevailing wage, but it also banned them for 3 years from bidding any public work. It also took away the word. So right now there is statute that will penalize a contractor for not paying the correct prevailing wage. They already have that. Okay? This one obviously triples the penalty. This bill proposed, and it took the word willful out. So mistakes mattered. Even payroll mistakes now succumb to that triple penalty.
So the bill didn't pass, but it was described in the newspaper recently, and there's going to be some training, I believe, provided for different industries, right? They haven't taken the complete stick approach. There's at least going to be maybe not carrots, but some they're supposedly trying to work with employers. Is that your understanding, or are they pretty much coming after businesses in this area?
So the Secretary's office is saying that they're going to be educating employers. And I don't doubt that they will be educating employers on what the correct, what the wages should be, how they should be paying them. But they have made it very clear that wage theft is going to be their main focus, that there is a backlog of wage theft claims, and that was going to be one of the primary focuses for the administration, is to go after this wage theft.
And it's not as simple as just paying, say, the minimum wage or anything. I mean, there's very complicated calculations that have to be made for prevailing wages and for a lot of these other issues in your industry.
There is very prevailing wage, especially for construction. It's not just minimum wage, although minimum wage can be difficult and challenging in and of itself,
given the patchwork we have in New Mexico.
Absolutely. But prevailing wage not only has the standard wage rate, but it also has the fringe benefits, which are calculated differently for every trade, and it also has what is subsistence pay. So if your employee is traveling further than 60 miles to work, they get paid a subsistence pay in order to help alleviate, to pay them extra to have to travel for out of town work. And that is calculated very differently. Sometimes it's from a major post office. Sometimes it's from I-40 or the big I. And that varies differently by trade. And so it's not just as simple of, well, you're not paying the wages. So it's not easily calculated what those wages are. Sometimes there is such thing as a discrepancy, or there is such thing as a argument about what the correct prevailing wage is.
Sure. And, I totally understand your perspective, and certainly McCamley and the administration generally not on the business side of things, not running businesses, and they're going to take a much different approach to the issue. So It'll be interesting to see how all that shakes out. Before I let you go, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the hobby horse that I love to talk about and complain about here in New Mexico, and I know your industry is affected by it, which is the gross receipts tax. Now, we had some hopes that there was going to be a real discussion about addressing the gross receipts tax before this session with the surplus and whatnot. It basically fell by the wayside immediately. But New Mexico charges this gross receipts tax, and I know that it's charged on a lot of business inputs, including at least some construction projects. How does this impact your industry, and what's your take on the gross receipts tax?
Well, our contractors have been dealing with the gross receipts tax for years. So honestly, no, I mean, we would love to see it changed to, I mean, obviously they're tired of doing that, but the gross receipts tax, what it has changed is now with suppliers. So now the suppliers can't charge the gross receipts tax as to where their location is. They have to change it as to where their deliveries are, which can make it very difficult when trying to calculate paying their gross receipts tax, making deliveries at several locations. So if a contractor buys a large amount of block, right, but they get it delivered to different job sites, well, that gross receipts tax now has to be calculated in different wherever the block is delivered, which can make it very difficult.
Was that a legislative change or was that an administrative change?
No, that was a legislative change.
Wow. So just hypothetically, you're here with X, Y, and Z company in Albuquerque, but you've got projects going on using some of the same materials in Las Cruces, Carlsbad, Alamogordo, and Silver City. You can't be taxed on the Albuquerque rate. You have to tax
where it's being dropped off at.
And you have to make that calculation based on, 25% of the blocks are going. That can be, and you can see why, getting that kind of calculation to wage theft and all these other issues, it gets very complicated very quickly.
It does get very complicated very quickly. And the fact that they just get penalized if they're wrong. It's like, well, we're paying as best as we can calculate it. And say, well, we'll tell you when you're wrong, and then we'll tell you how much you owe us.
Yeah. And, I know that New Mexico oriented businesses, your members are used to the gross receipts tax, but, and I know there are certain exemptions for some aspects of it, but a lot of the materials that go into these buildings are taxed to the contractor purchasing them. So I actually live right across the street from, I'm sure you're aware of, Presbyterian at Coors and Western Trail right now is building a very large, I think it's a urgent care facility. And I just drive by it all the time and I see these steel beams sticking out of the ground. I think, in New Mexico, we're charging 7.875% here in Albuquerque and on those steel beams, but in Texas and other states, there's nobody taxing that building input, and it has to make construction here higher than it would otherwise be.
Absolutely. It would. And that gets passed on, right?
Sure.
Contractors then pass it on to the owner that then passes it on to their customers. So in the end, it's the people that really pay for all of this. It is not the companies that if they're trying to stick it to the company and to make them pay their fair share of wages or their fair share of taxes, it really is the general public that ends up paying any of this.
I just thought of, wouldn't that be on an APS building because the contractor's purchasing it? Wouldn't they be taxed on that too? Or is there a way that...
So there is something called cost segregation, and there are certain things that are non-taxable within that. I'll give you the example of a science lab. So the gas lines and the equipment and the tables that would make up that science lab would not be taxable. So there are certain things. Cost segregation is, in fact, there are, entire firms that specialize in how that gets carved out. But at one point, even the legislature came back and said, well, we're going to do away with cost segregation. And then it just taxes the entire process. So, there's a finesse in trying to figure out how to save money throughout the process of building a building. But again, to your point, inevitably it's the owner that really comes down because the contractor it's kind of more of a pass through. They get charged at gross receipts and they will then charge the owner.
Yeah. For government to charge taxes on projects that they
ultimately
the taxpayers are being charged to pay for seems like a very silly situation. And that's government for you, though. And Carla, if folks, again, want to find out more about your organization, or in particular, if there's a young person or parent of a young person interested in some of your apprenticeships, give out the particulars, website, et cetera, phone numbers for the Associated Builders and Contractors.
Sure. You can find us at www.abcnm.org. I gave you Greta's number. You can also just reach me, 830-4222, any of the extensions. There's four of us. So if you ask for apprenticeship, we will all know what you're talking about.
Carla will answer all of the phones. She's
will.
very talented. Yeah. And all right. Thank you for tuning in. And Carla, thanks for stopping by. We're working every day to turn New Mexico around. Go to RioGrandeFoundation.org for more information or to support our work.